The Last of Us is an exercise in deconstructing society. It is not a zombie story, but rather an observation of human nature and relations set against the backdrop of a post-apocalyptic world where most constructs of society have collapsed, and the remnants of humanity have attempted to rebuild it in one way or another. After the outbreak, the world was thrown into chaos, and 20 years later we witness all these different individuals and groups navigating this world, helping, robbing, killing one another, as they strive to survive in any way they can. We follow Joel and Ellie as they cross the country, and later through their life in Jackson. But along the way, they encounter many people and societies, offering us, through the character and world building, a glimpse into what this post-apocalyptic world has become and how it functions. The society that has emerged from the global disaster in The Last of Us is a reflection of our own were we to face such extreme circumstances. By picking apart our world and examining what is left of it, the show offers a commentary on our real-world power dynamics, economic and political structures. There is something interesting in the politics of The Last of Us. When I saw it for the first time, it immediately seemed somehow critical of today's world and the capitalist system. Maybe not so much on the outside, but I watched it a second and a third time, and even more now that the second season is out, and it became increasingly obvious to me that there is an anti-capitalist rhetoric woven into many aspects of the show. And it goes beyond just the most on-the-nose examples of political commentary.
This is the commune. We're communists.
Capitalism and dystopias have long been intertwined, and The Last of Us is yet another modern example of that. So I want to talk about how The Last of Us offers a compelling critique of capitalism, presenting a post-apocalyptic world that mirrors the flaws and consequences of our own capitalist system. Also, this is a possible reading of the text of the show, not necessarily an intended commentary, and obviously this is my personal opinion, so if you're mad about it, please express so in the comment section below and feed the algorithm God. Thank you. Also, spoilers. Dystopias are, at their core, cautionary tales. They tap into our very real fears of what our world can become if we continue down the same path. It comes as no surprise then that numerous modern dystopias in literature, film, and TV harbor critical undertones towards various aspects of capitalism, the reigning system of our world today. From classics of the past century like Brazil, The Truman Show, and Blade Runner, to the youth-targeted hits of the last decade like The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, and Divergent, or recent productions like Mad Max Fury Road, Black Mirror, or Don't Look Up, each narrative sheds light on flaws or characteristics of the capitalist system. They resonate with concerns about socioeconomic inequality, where the rich become richer and the poor become more marginalized, resulting in social unrest. Capitalism's relentless pursuit of profit, which leads to the dehumanization and exploitation of individuals, where their worth is measured solely by their economic productivity or consumption. The ravages of capitalism on the environment, reflecting concerns about the depletion of natural resources and the disregard for ecological sustainability. Our concerns about the rise of technology and surveillance, or even surveillance as entertainment. Even works like George Orwell's 1984, though largely considered, at least in the West, criticism of communist totalitarianism, is also surprisingly relevant in our world of surveillance, misuse, and manipulation of language with the purpose of propaganda, a world of consumerism and alienation. Many of these stories condemn the upper class and those in power who exploit both people and the earth, while highlighting the significance of community and mutual aid. These characteristics and themes of modern dystopian narratives exist in The Last of Us too, so much so that the apocalypse itself was caused by capitalism. But I'll get to that. Dystopian narratives in film and literature have been connected to capitalism for decades. But it's not just that. They're products of capitalism. Dystopias warn us what future is ahead of us if we leave our system unchecked, and the flaws of our world unaddressed. Then all dystopian works of fiction created within capitalism should be essentially a critique of capitalism. With that, The Last of Us is anti-capitalist first and foremost because, as a dystopian narrative created within our capitalist reality, it is inherently anti-capitalist. A dystopia is created out of the world preceding it. It develops out of the unchecked flaws in our system, and it does so over time. Then, a post-apocalyptic world as a type of dystopian narrative can also be brought on by the world before it, but in this case, much quicker, through a single event. The apocalypse in The Last of Us itself is a result of capitalism. The global fungal pandemic was caused by a number of factors brought on by the capitalist world that preceded the disaster. We only get a few scenes of explanation about what happened to the world through exposition and later through Joel's recollection of the events, but they are just enough to give us an understanding of what occurred. And the apocalypse of The Last of Us was the result of global warming, mass consumption, and the monopoly of resources. In the retrospect set in 1968, which is not a part of the game, I believe it was created for the show, the very first scene of the show, really, a scientist during a broadcast theorizes the spread of a fungus which will appear due to the melting of the ice caps caused by global warming. While this scene is used as exposition and gives us a nice and clear context of how and why the world of the show collapsed, it mirrors with eerie accuracy the way scientists in the real world have been warning us about the dangers of climate disaster for over 50, 70 years. It mirrors the lack of action on climate change in our own world despite increasing public concerns and calls for green initiatives and sustainable practices. The capitalist way of exploiting resources, putting corporations' interests above the concerns for the environment, is, in the real world, just like in the world of the show, very much a capitalist issue. Capitalism is a system promising unlimited growth on a planet with limited resources, one that fosters an expanding consumer culture and mass production without consideration for the effects that it has on the planet. A system that puts profit above all, profits above our future. A system in which legislation is passed in benefit of the biggest polluters, while they put the blame on people and hypocritically call for individual responsibility, which is virtually ineffective on the larger scale. In the show, the capitalist exploitation of the planet that led to global warming and inevitably to the melting of the ice caps was what released the cordyceps initially, leading to its potential worldwide spread. And so, global warming, and by extension the capitalist system that caused it, led to a worldwide pandemic of cordyceps that brought on the apocalypse of The Last of Us. While the virus was released because of global warming, it spread this fast because of two other occurrences very characteristic to capitalism: mass consumption and the monopoly of resources. In the beginning of episode 3, Joel explains to Ellie how it all started. The cordyceps mutated, some of it got into the food supply, and spread through the fast and mass consumption of basic ingredients like flour and sugar. Certain brands of food were everywhere, all over the world. The global monopoly on these ingredients and the quick mass distribution made sure everybody around the world had the same products almost at the same time, consumed the same things produced and distributed by the same companies. In the first episode, we can even see the close calls that Joel and Sarah had to get infected this way. They incidentally avoided these products a number of times, like when Joel forgot to take his birthday cake from the shop, Sarah kept refusing her neighbor's cookies, and they were out of pancake mix. So far, the infected don't seem to be the villains of the show, as much as the system's practices that brought about the virus and spread it around the globe. Global warming and the climate catastrophe led to the release of the cordyceps, while production monopoly and mass consumption quickly spread it around the world, causing a global pandemic in a day. Considering what we recently went through with the COVID-19 pandemic, our government's failure to react competently and quickly, and seeing the wealth inequality deepen as the rich got richer out of this disaster, the analogy with the virus in the show is hardly a stretch. Resonating with our own fears about the future in a capitalist world of exploiting Earth, The Last of Us shows us the downfall of civilized society brought on by an unsustainable system, and so puts the blame for the cordyceps pandemic directly on capitalism. As I said in the beginning, The Last of Us is not a zombie story. The infected are not the villains of it. This leaves us to wonder who is, or what is. People have extensively analyzed the zombie narrative in modern TV, cinema, and games, discussing zombies' presence in these narratives in a variety of ways, From a very literal representation of our fear of death and mindless, senseless existence, to an allegory for terrorism as a threat lurking from within society. The infected of The Last of Us don't seem to fit any of those. And this is first of all because they're not, well, zombies. They're never called zombies. Yes, they are living dead and they move and act like we would expect from zombies in the way that their image is shaped by modern media. But that's where the similarities end. There is a difference in the way people refer to them. Infected. They're not villains, they're sick. They're victims. The characters of the show, while fearing them and defending themselves against them, killing them, seem to also think of them with a sense of compassion. There is a scene in episode 2 of season 1 where Ellie asks Joel whether it gets easier killing them, knowing that they were human once. We follow characters that do get infected and we sympathize with them, seeing them as victims of a sickness more than anything else. And it's not just the word infected that indicates that they are not the bad guys of the show. When Ellie asks Joel how the outbreak started, he answers with a question. I thought you went to school.
Federal school, teaches how their shitty government failed to prevent a pandemic.
She doesn't say they don't teach us how quickly spreading cordyceps caused an apocalypse, or they don't teach us how the infected started biting people and took over the world. She places the infected out of the equation completely, putting the blame solely on the corrupt political system, on people, on authority. One of the more popular criticisms of the show is that there is not enough infected. In fact, we see them only in a couple of episodes, and the rest of the time they're barely present. The show is not about them. It is about human relations and the meaning they give us, the strength they give us to keep going in a hopeless world. In the game, they are everywhere so that the player can interact with them and advance in the game, but in the show, they're not really needed that much. They're an occasional obstacle. They are mainly there to create the backdrop of an apocalypse, an uninhabitable world of danger, making us, like our characters, constantly alert. They don't need to be on screen to make us fear for our heroes. And yet, Joel and Ellie get to interact with the infected way less than with people. With the variety of characters, Joel and Ellie, and later Ellie and Dina, meet along the way. And more often than not, these people are trouble. The conflict is always people versus people, not people versus infected. People that represent different societal structures that existed before, or at least attempts at such. They are the real obstacles to our protagonists, and so the show spends more time on them. These people and their respective societies with their social, political, economic systems that they built and are trying to maintain are largely framed as obstacles. So if the infected are not the villain of The Last of Us, but people are, and all those people are representative of different makeshift societies, is it possible that the show presents some characters and systems as working better or worse than others? Looking into all of these people and systems reveals a stronger criticism of some, leading to yet another way that capitalism is scrutinized in the show, both literally and by elevating anti-capitalist values, presenting them as favorable in this post-apocalyptic world. The Last of Us reminded me a lot of William Golding's Lord of the Flies. In similar ways to The Last of Us, it is an attempt in deconstructing society. When a plane with children crashes on a deserted island and no adults survive, the children are left to fend for themselves, and in order to survive, they inevitably create a society with different roles, where some are leaders and some followers, to the point that they end up with equivalents of political, military, and religious leaders. This happens because even as they are building a society anew, and they are children who have limited knowledge of the way the grown-up world is organized, they still modeled their society on something that they have seen, something that already exists. Even starting from scratch, they have a pre-existing knowledge of power dynamics. Just like in The Last of Us. The political and economic dynamics that emerged or were rebuilt after the end of the world in The Last of Us mirror ones that existed before, and the show seems to present some as better functioning than others. When society collapsed, there was an existing power dynamic and societal, political, and economic systems. The shitty government that fails to prevent a pandemic still existed, and had the tools of power and control: military, resources, authority, weapons. The more authoritarian it became, the stronger resistance it faced, and out of that new, more obviously authoritarian system emerged others. Other systems and societies that tried to do things differently, some more successfully than others. As Joe and Ellie cross the country, they encounter a number of them. While at the beginning we're only familiar with the federal-controlled QZ, along the way we learned that it did not prevail everywhere. While in Boston, the Fireflies is fighting Fedra's control as an anti-government guerrilla-like organization. In Kansas, we see that the Fireflies succeeded in overthrowing Fedra and established authority. Later, we see how hunger and despair allowed the religious leader in the face of David to take power in a place where neither Fedra nor the Fireflies reign. Our characters encounter raiders which decided that the best way to survive is to fend for themselves in a more tribal fashion. There is a scene in episode 3 where Bill and Frank are fighting and the following exchange occurs.
You live in a psycho bunker where 9/11 was an inside job and the government are all Nazis. The government are all Nazis! Now, but not then.
I would argue that they were. Even then, they were all Nazis, in the sense that there was a form of authoritarian government whose tools of power were the army and the police. Not to mention that we know where this world would end up without the cordyceps pandemic. The government was well on its way to become Nazis. While obviously the beginning of the cordyceps pandemic was a time where governments did not know how to act, the use of force that would lead to the military dictatorship that we see in the QZ as the situation got worse is evident from the start. In episode 1 of the first season, the scene of Sarah's death struck me immediately as an interesting choice. She did not die at the hands of the infected on the first day of the outbreak. She could have easily been bitten or torn apart by infected as they were trying to escape. It could have served the same purpose of developing Joel's character, his trauma from being unable to save his daughter, his suicide attempt, his motivation, his subsequent connection to Ellie, and the parallels between Ellie and Sarah. But she didn't die because of the infected. She was shot by militia personnel who were following orders. With this, we see the beginning of an authoritarian military regime. And even if we didn't see how other systems specifically developed with the world of the show, we are led to criticize them. They are threats to our main characters. They are cruel, act inhumanely, disregard the lives and safety of others. Even if they have a reason to be so in this world of danger, we see their ways as excessive. David is a cannibal who tries to brutally assault and kill Ellie. Kathleen, as much as her motivations are humanized, is a ruthless leader who has no mercy for whom she deems a traitor to her cause. Marlene and her Fireflies are also not someone we root for at the end, even if we fully understand their motivation and the significance of her cause and their mission. As they all mirror different types of organization, of society in our real world, the show puts them all in unflattering light. They're villains. They're villains to us, at least, as much as we can understand the complexities of the world and the characters, our main characters as well, the complexities of Joel specifically. These people and systems we see as deeply flawed. However, there seems to be one that's functioning better than others. Here it is, the elephant in the room, the big C word.
So, communism.
Nah, I didn't like that.
Even if your Maria literally spells it out, I actually find their system to be more akin to an anarchist collective than some communist structure. Or at least that's what I thought when I watched the first season. They have a collective ownership system. It seems that their society is organized in a way where everybody is doing everything. They change roles. People seem to learn how to do everything, patrol, defend, construction, electricity, etc. I'm not sure about the anarchism now with the second season because we see the same council in the second season as in the first one, and in an anarchist system you would rotate leaders or more like organizers. Decisions and leadership should be done together, but I don't know, maybe they rotated in that time. Anyways, it is some sort of a mutual aid leftist progressive idea of a society, whether it's communist or anarchist.
This is the commune. We're communists.
Okay. From all the places and all the people that Joel and Ellie encounter traveling across America, there is one place that seems to function the best. Jackson.
This place actually fucking works.
the one place that actually fucking works, in the words of Ellie, in the world of the show is communist. And this is pointed out in the show in many ways, other than Maria's remark. This is not a direct criticism of capitalism on the part of the show. However, communism being the diametric opposite of capitalism in our collective consciousness for the past 150 years, and Jackson being, first of all, described as communist, and second of all, the most successfully functioning society that we encounter, all of these things together make me think that the show is very much anti-capitalist. I take this from Jackson. If the best place that exists in the post-apocalypse, as far as we can see, is communist, then the text of the show can be read as anti-capitalist. But why is it the best place, the best system in the story? We especially see this through the eyes of Joel and Ellie, specifically Ellie. She literally says this place is the best. She marvels at the progress that society has made, the life that they've built for themselves, something that she has not seen before, something that we have not seen before in this show. They've gotten to a point in society where they not only have these institutions and live in relative safety, they have these small luxuries of normality, like Maria cutting Ellie's hair, or the cinema, or the Christmas tree, the menstrual cup that she gives Ellie. They have sanitary materials. Like, they've moved on from basic survival to living a somewhat normal life. From all the places that we've seen, there's not one that works with a similar power structure, or the lack thereof in this case, equality and understanding, mutual aid. And I'll talk about mutual aid specifically later. It's not only Ellie's words of surprise that this place works, it's the only place where our characters feel safe. In season 1, Joel even suggests they abandon the mission and go back to Tommy to live their lives. And this is where we find them in season 2, 4 years later, where we see more of how the society functions. One could argue that they go back just so that Joel is reunited with his brother, but I think Joel is over that once he saw that Tommy is safe. Also, he leaves the choice to Ellie, and I think suggests Jackson simply because it's the safest and best functioning place they've encountered, where they can have a somewhat normal life. Jackson is safe and functions without an oppressive power structure. People work together to build back a life after the apocalypse. And as in The Lord of the Flies, they are rebuilding the society using already familiar economic and political models that existed before the end of the world. Maria does explain that they have been able to preserve their society because they were keeping it on the low, building it in the middle of nowhere and staying off the radio. In season 1, this suggests that they don't believe that this way of forming society can survive, growing too much too fast at this point. But we see them willing to take in people, first Joel and Ellie, and then in the second season, trying to make more space for more people. You were refugees once too. I think the word refugee here is very important considering what's happening in the world right now, specifically in the US and Europe. It suggests a system based on solidarity and mutual aid despite the difficulties that the world presents. So, I believe Jackson stands as the example of the anti-capitalist rhetoric of the show. Communism is the antithesis of capitalism. The one system that was rebuilt to function in the post-apocalypse world of The Last of Us is communist, by the character's words. And it's also the best, again, by the character's words. So it's yet another element of the show that displays as a criticism of capitalism, be it indirectly. And it's not only the explicitly stated communism of Jackson. Communist, anarchist, progressive rhetoric and values exist throughout the show in the way societies function and in the way people interact with each other. Mutual aid rather than individualism, for example, is one among many such qualities that are in contradiction with capitalist values. And there's more. Once again, The Last of Us is essentially about human connection and the meaning that we find in it. That's hardly a controversial take. And of course, it is about survival. We see how the community of Jackson has managed to survive by creating a system of coexistence that uses some communist or anarchist structures, but most of all is successful on account of certain characteristics and values that their community holds. Not only in Jackson, but throughout the show, we see the connection between the way people act with one another and their chances of survival or sense of safety. While a lot of these characteristics and values might not be specific to any particular system, they're easily very anti-capitalist. In his book Mutual Aid, one of the fathers of anarchism, Pyotr Kropotkin, goes through the history of civilization, showing how societies have been constructed on mutual aid, helping each other survive. He goes so far as to explain how that works even in the animal kingdom. He argues that Darwinism, in this sense, is misunderstood. We tend to think of Darwin's idea of his survival of the fittest in a very literal sense. The strongest, fittest, most agile of the species prevails. Kind of how we also think within capitalism, on an individualistic level. If you are not thriving, that's kind of on you. You haven't tried hard enough. The ones who adapt climb the social or corporate ladder, while the ones that can't, well, they were not smart or hardworking enough to make it. Well, Kropotkin argues that even within Darwinism, this idea of survival of the fittest is misunderstood. He gives examples of species where the strongest or more able individuals helped the weaker, and that's how the species survived. He goes on to give similar examples within tribal societies, while recognizing that it got harder for these systems of mutual aid to prevail once kingdoms and empires encompassed them and applied their own idea of a system, probably one where the monarch, leader, or upper classes benefit more. This kind of sounded to me like Jackson's citizens' refusal to share their community and home with just anybody or to grow it rapidly, for fear of it developing a more hierarchical system. But again, that seems to have been changing by season 2. They seem more open to get people in while also maintaining their system. The idea of helping each other is very anti-capitalist. The culture of individualism and competition forces us to fight for more of the limited positions, resources, and so on. When personal gain and profit is on the top of the priorities, why would we share? Why would we elevate each other? But in The Last of Us, a story of survival, I mean literal survival, defying death, staying alive in a world where danger lurks around every corner, either through the spreading of the disease through the infected or the oppressive systems that pit people against people and make them fight for limited resources, we get to see how people survive by helping each other, by systems of mutual aid. Individualism does not go that far in the post-apocalypse of The Last of Us. In the scarcity of a post-apocalyptic world, the characters engage in sharing and redistributing limited resources. They prioritize the needs of the group over individual accumulation, changing the capitalist notion of private property. This act of sharing resources ensures the collective well-being and survival of the community, emphasizing the importance of collective ownership and cooperation. We see this not only in Jackson with the mutual ownership and distribution of resources. Cooperation and interdependence are central themes throughout the show. Joel and Ellie rely on each other for survival, forming a bond that emphasizes mutual aid. They encounter other characters who join forces to achieve common goals, demonstrating the strength of collective action and mutual support in the face of adversity. Individuals die while groups survive. The Last of Us shows us that characters that prioritize their own self-interest often face negative consequences, while those that engage in acts of mutual aid and selflessness contribute to the greater good.
Just like in the game, the characters in The Last of Us engage in collaborative decision-making processes. They discuss and weigh the options together, taking into account the diverse perspectives and expertise of the group. This approach reflects a commitment to democratic decision-making and challenges the hierarchical decision-making structures often found in capitalist societies. They reject the notion of centralized authority and instead prioritize horizontal relationships based on mutual aid and cooperation. By working together and making decisions collectively, they demonstrate a rejection of top-down control and embrace a more egalitarian approach to survival. This critique serves as an anti-capitalist statement questioning the ethics of profit-driven systems that disregard the well-being of individuals and communities. Mutual aid, resistance against hierarchy, emphasis on relationships and solidarity, collaborative sharing of resources. They offer a critique of capitalist systems and highlight alternative modes of navigating and surviving in this post-apocalyptic world. The Last of Us is not a zombie story. It's a story about human relations, but also one about rebuilding communities, rebuilding the world. How the world ended and how it came out functioning have all to do with the way people organize themselves in societies. In essence,
The Last of Us invites us to contemplate the consequences of capitalism while presenting alternative paths that prioritize humanity, cooperation, and sustainability. The series transcends this post-apocalyptic genre, leaving us with a reflection on the complexities of our contemporary world. From the human fault in the beginning of the apocalypse to the critiques of individualism and greed, all on top of the idea that every dystopian narrative created within capitalism is inherently a critique of it, The Last of Us, masked behind a zombie story, points out problems in our current system. And while it is not overtly political, and this is just one reading of it, it leaves us thinking about the values that we hold and the way that we are headed. What do you think?